Aloha, and welcome to another episode of Hawaii's Living Legend Lawyers, brought to you by the Hawaii State Bar Association and ThinkTech Hawaii. This is a program honoring our three-digit attorneys, and by that I mean the attorneys with 3 digits to their bar numbers. These are attorneys that were admitted to practice law in the 1960s and 70s, are part of the legend and the fabric of the legal system here in Hawaii, and we're honoring them with our Hawaii State Bar Association program. This initiative started by our current president, Greg Markham. This is to preserve the legacy of some of our legal pioneers in our Bar Association. My name is Craig Wagnild. I was a 2013 president of the Hawaii State Bar and currently a partner at the law firm of Bays, Lung, Rose, and Homa. And I have the honor of serving as host for today's program, which celebrates some attorneys here who love their work. This is about loving their work, and I have the pleasure of being here, sitting in our studio today with 2 different attorneys, 2 of our local legend attorneys, Don Machado, who's sitting immediately to my left, I guess as you're looking at it, right, and also Gunnar Schull. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. It's great to have you here. Let me start with just a very simple question. What brought you here to Hawaii? Don Machado, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Actually, I'm 4th generation. Don Jr. is 5th. My great-grandfather came here in 1883, with my grandmother and her sister, So the family's been here for 5 generations, so I go way back when.
Okay. And you came, now currently you're serving as chief of the torts and litigation section in the Army, is that correct?
Right.
And have you been with the Army all along?
Yeah, actually, I really had 3 careers, with the Army. When I was in law school, the draft was on, so I was deferred, for 7 years, and as soon as I graduated from Georgetown, I was going to be drafted. I remember my dad saying, you better get yourself in the Army, but I had to pass a bar exam. So I took the DC bar and passed that. And then I used that as a means of applying, for commission. So I was commissioned as a 1st lieutenant in the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, And from there, the Judge Advocate General gave us 1st lieutenant bars, but he wanted to make sure we were soldiers. So we spent 3 months at the infantry school, and then another 3 months at University of Virginia, where the Judge Advocate General School, is had, and then a beautiful assignment, Presidio, San Francisco, and my assignment was as and I'd never been in the courtroom, by the way, as a defense counsel, and wartime desertion from the Korean War. We have people who have been gone a long time, and I knew what the penalty is for wartime desertion, death,
Yes.
So anyway, I did that for a year, and I committed myself, for 3 years. And then I remember talking to the prosecutor, we were, the 2 of us opposed each other, for 2 years. I said, you've got an easy job. And he said, well, why don't you take it? So I became a prosecutor. So then after that, I was required to go into a reserve unit, after my 3 years on active duty. So I joined the 322nd Civil Affairs Group, and it was a very interesting unit. It's a unit that would go into a country that had just had a revolution, and they needed professionals. So in the unit were attorneys, doctors, nurses. We had professors at the University of Hawaii. We had horticulturists, and I became their legal officer, and had supervision over them. And incidentally, one of the people in the unit, and there were a lot of attorneys in the unit, was Judge Ezra.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now he left the unit before he became a judge, before I appeared before him, but I used to write him, and anyway, and I did that for really for 30 years, and eventually I was assigned as the deputy chief of the U.S. Army Claims Service, And then the job opened, as a tort claims and litigation type of activity. So I took that, and I did that for 50 years, you know.
For 50 years?
Yeah,
And you're still doing that now?
No, I'm retired.
Oh, you're retired.
I finally
Okay.
retired, you know. But what it meant is that, see, under the Federal Tort Claims Act, you can't sue. You have to go to the agency and to their attorney. And of course, my job was to settle those cases, you know, where settlement was, and I know all the plaintiffs' attorney, Rick Freed.
I'm sure you did.
And so on. And that's what I did, you know, for 50 years. And they included lots of interesting cases. Well, I represented medical malpractice at Tripler,
Yes.
the Holly Cole Hotel, you know, and people were always finding holes and sipping sidewalks, you know. 2 clubs, you know, the trade winds blew a whole heavy piece of wood on someone, you know. And traffic accidents, you know, and maneuvers, and Army Recreation Center, you know. And it was in Hawaii and also over in the Pacific, you know. In fact, a Army tugboat ran into a German freighter, you know, causing $100,000 worth of damage, you know, to the bow, you know. So I flew over there, and I met with the captain, and we settled the case over some good cold German beer, you know.
I want some of those kind of cases.
and then traffic accidents, you know, whether you remember maybe 10 years or more, Army tractor trailer was carrying some sort of item, and it knocked the bridge by
Oh, that's right, yes.
And 12 hours of traffic tie-up. In fact, the newspaper came out saying stuck, you know. But
Yes.
anyway, that's what I did, and you know, and so the attorney that wanted to sue would have to come see me if it involved the Army, you know.
Go to Schull.
Well, I was working in San Francisco right out of law school, and came over to Hawaii on a vacation. And that was in the spring of '64.
Now, you went to law school in Virginia.
Right.
Then moved your way over to San Francisco. And then
I thought that would be a good big city to start with. And I came to Hawaii, and the last day I was here, I went down and interviewed for a job. And that was with Smith Wild BB & Cades, which was the firm name at that time. But I'd never been to Hawaii, but my parents were married here. They were up stationed at Schofield, and my mother's father was at Schofield, and my father was in the Corps of Engineers and stationed there. And my brother was born here. And then when they left Hawaii, they never came back, but they left with Hawaii with a lot of records and a lot of pictures.
Sure.
So, you know, I had a vision of Hawaii in my mind, but...
well, each of you had connections, essentially, here, even before you'd come.
Well, I knew people here,
Yeah.
before I came, yeah. And so I had lived in Florida off and on, and in Panama, and I hadn't realized how much I missed short sleeve weather. And so over here on vacation, I said, gotta try this place out. So I did.
Well, take me back to that time period where you made the call and said you interviewed for a job, you got a job, and you came over. What's it like here? And you had to get ready, take the bar exam.
I had to, you had to have been a resident for a year before they let you take the bar exam. But I took the position that I became a resident when I was here on vacation, because that's when I intended to come back and with the job. And I managed to petition the Supreme Court for a midterm a bar exam. They usually just gave them once a year, and so they agreed, and we had about 20 of us who took the bar in January, And so I got in about 6 months earlier than I would have otherwise, having to
So are
having to
you
wait.
the one who started the twice-a-year bar exam?
I think there had been a petition before then. I don't know. A lawyer named Buck Ashford and I made the petition, and he was sort of in the same boat that I was. I don't think they have that residency requirement anymore, though.
No.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
think-
but it was a while before they changed that rule.
Yeah, there was some potential, some constitutionality
Yes, there
arguments,
was,
I believe,
yes.
that were brought up on that one
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah.
But many of the attorneys that, in fact, all of them so far that I've spoken with on this program have pointed to that as one, not impediment, but I mean, certainly one hurdle.
Yeah,
As they came in
definitely.
and began to
Yeah.
start.
And we didn't have a law school then, so a lot of the lawyers were from out of state. And if you were here in Hawaii, you had to go off to the mainland to go to law school.
What was the practice of law like, and what kind of work were you doing at that time?
Actually, I was doing corporate work in San Francisco for a large law firm, and came here and really did the same work. There were probably about 25 publicly held companies at that time. The big five were all publicly held, and they had some of the plantations were still publicly held, even though they were controlled by the big five sugar factors.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had Dillingham, and you had banks, and various other companies that were publicly held. So there was a lot of corporate law in those days, and that lasted for about 20
maybe
years.
more so than they even have now.
Well, they're all gone now.
Yeah.
Alexander and Baldwin is the only one of the big five that has survived. American Factors changed its name to AmFact, and it's gone. Davies, which was a British company, which was one of the big five, was acquired by Jardines in Hong Kong. C. Brewer was acquired by some company in Philadelphia, and Castle and Cook belongs to Murdoch now.
Wow.
So that's A&B was really the only survivor of the original companies that were around in '64.
When we come back, I'm going to want to hear a couple of these stories that you've told me about, some cases that you really remember from your each of you distinguished practices, but just interesting cases that stick with you and part of what made you hopefully love your work. So, you're watching Hawaii's Living Legend Lawyers, sponsored by the Hawaii State Bar Association and ThinkTech Hawaii. We're going to take a quick break and be back. Don't go anywhere. A lot of interesting stuff left to come.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45, and it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, from practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's the
media.
difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
And that's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on, and we're both sides of the story, or even when there's more than two sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't
Jay.
you guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
And welcome back. Hawaii's Living Legend Lawyers. I'm Craig Wagnild, and this is a program sponsored by our Hawaii State Bar Association, ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm sitting in the studio today with Don Machado and Gunnar Schull, and we're talking about two guys that love their work. And we're talking about two of our three-digit attorneys. And just as we were going into break, I recalled we had this great photo, Don, of you getting sworn in. And hopefully we can put it up there on the screen, and Don, you can tell us a little bit about this. But first of all, when was this taken?
January 1954.
Okay, and this is when you were sworn in. Where are you in this photo? We're looking at it right now on the screen, and if I look to your far...
Oh, that handsome guy all the way at
In
the
the back,
end,
yeah?
The last one in the back there.
Okay, on the far right,
The one
in
with
the
all
back,
with the hair.
and you're wearing a suit coat, yes, and your face is partially obscured by the gentleman in front of you, I think, but you are right in the front on the back.
Right.
And that's you, and you were being sworn in. It looked like about 20 people or so then.
Yep.
And what was the passage rate for the bar about that point?
I think it was 20%. It was quite low. Yeah,
20%.
it was very low. Yeah.
So 100 of you took the bar, and you were the 20 that prevailed.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I had taken another bar. I took the bar exam in the District of Columbia.
That's right.
Because I was going to be drafted, and I had to get into the service, And so it kind of helped a little bit, but the two bar exams were very different from each other. The DC bar, very short questions and very short answers. Hawaii, just very complicated fact pattern, In fact, the exam was given at the Supreme Court of Hawaii, in one of the libraries, And I remember I was sitting at one end of a desk, and this other fellow, don't remember, was sitting at the other end. And during the break, he came up to me and he said, you're writing an awful lot.
That obviously worked for you.
Yeah, it worked, yeah. That was the real, so. But I had already passed the DC bar when I took it
Okay.
here. Yeah. And then, of course, from there, I was commissioned in the Judge Advocate General's Court in
That's
the
right.
Army. Yep.
Started right
Yeah,
in.
right, so.
And Gunnar, because you started in January.
Right.
you
Well, I took the bar in
You
January.
took the bar in January.
Yeah.
You had a much smaller class, right?
A very small class, yeah.
You said only 20 of you took it.
That was my recollection.
Yeah.
We also took it in the Supreme Court Library.
And did you get sworn in then as just a group of those,
Uh,
the passing of
I
those
don't
20?
even remember getting sworn in, but I'm sure I was. Yeah.
Well, I would hope so.
I think there were just 3 or 4 of us.
Well, I wanted to go to a case or two that you recall from your career. I mean, there's so many, but then there are some that stick with you that you remember, whether it's because of a client or a situation or an outcome. Let's start with you, Don. Some case that
Gosh,
sticks with you.
after 50 years, I think one that I remember that I was pleased with the outcome. We had a serviceman come back from Afghanistan and so on. So he went ahead and rented a cabin at Waianae Army Recreation Center, And unfortunately, there were hoodlums that lived in the area, and what they would do, they'd find an empty cabin and come in and steal, television sets and so on.
Right.
So anyway, so he went to bed, and children went to bed, and his wife had a TV on real low, so these people came along, and they thought nobody was in the cabin, so they began to rifle with the door, and the wife heard it, so she put the light on and called her husband, and with that they ran away. So he went after them, and one of them took a gun and killed them.
Oh.
So we received I forget who the attorney was at this point, a multi-million-dollar claim, for the death of the serviceman, because We didn't have enough guards, and enough security and so on, So we used as a basis the Ferries Doctrine, and the Ferries Doctrine, in effect, Supreme Court decision goes way back when, says that when you're in active duty, if your injury is incident to service, then you cannot sue the government. And so the argument we had was that you provide this recreation area for the servicemen and his family to enjoy. This is part of your privileges and so on. And anyway, we ended up in the courtroom. Judge Mulway was the judge, by the way.
Oh.
And so, she was ready to rule, really, now, what do you mean? Incident of service, Ferries Doctrine, somebody's out having a good time, The Ninth Circuit had a case that was similar. So that came in, and I still see her from the bench, saying, I'm reluctant to make this ruling, but anyway, the government's motion to dismiss is granted. So, but I mean, it was one of those, and we use ferries, not that often, but this is one. There was a question on this, and that case now is cited. It's been appealed and so on. So,
well, that's a good one. Gunnar, do you have a case or two like this that sticks with you?
I stayed out of court
Right.
as much as I possibly could. Although Susan Mulway was one of my partners at one time, and I've enjoyed watching her career as a judge and as chief judge.
Yes.
So I guess my cases would be more transactional. And when some of the things I worked on when I first came here were AmFac was, American Factors was developing Kaanapali and some of the early hotel leases and whatnot, and building a contract to build a golf course, which went way over budget. And the board of directors of AmFac was astounded. But of course, AmFac, Kaanapali later became AmFac's cash cow.
Yes.
I mean, whenever they needed any money, they could sell a piece of property at Kaanapali, and that looked really great. I remember doing a number of acquisitions for American Factors at that time. The one that kind of stood out was we acquired a company called Fred Harvey, which was, they had restaurants in all the train stations across the country. And they had, the waitresses were called Harvey girls. And I had actually, when I was little, I did go across the country a couple of times by train. And I remember those restaurants.
Yes.
And I got a kick out of acquiring that company. And their main asset actually was, they had a franchise from the United States on the south rim of Grand Canyon. And that was a moneymaker for them.
Is that right?
And actually AmFac, of course, was getting into the hotel business. They acquired Island Holidays, Gus Lander's company here.
Yes.
And Fred Harvey also had some hotels. So for a while they were, they had diversified into a number of things, including hotel business. So a lot of those acquisitions and everything were somewhat time consuming and frankly, very enjoyable.
Now, were you traveling over there a fair amount?
Oh,
then,
sure.
Maui and other
Oh, yeah. I'd go over and come back home and change my shirt and go back over again. I think I'd run into an executive of AmFac every once in a while. He'd say, "Why aren't you back in Honolulu, where you're supposed to be?"
They wanted you there behind your desk.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, both of you strike me as people that enjoy your work. And given that that's the title for today's program, I wanted to ask you, now, when you first started and you decided, I'm going to go to law school, I'm going to go into law, was that your first choice? Was that a fallback? How did you choose that?
I mean, decided to go to law school?
Yes. Go into law as a career.
My dad was a newspaper writer, in fact, one of his had a daily column foreshadowing the town. But he had Judge Tavares, and was a very good friend with him, and so I had some contact with him, and I admired him, and so I just naturally went ahead and applied. In fact, I had three choices actually. I would say accepted at Georgetown, Harvard, and University of Michigan. And Judge
Wow.
Tavares was University of Michigan, and so my father said, "You're going to go to the University of Michigan, you know. You don't want to disappoint the judge, you know." Well, Notre Dame was my undergraduate.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
as a matter of fact, as far as we can determine, I and another fellow are the first local boys to graduate.
Is that right, from Notre Dame?
Yeah. In fact, when I came in, I had two all foreign students or so. But Notre Dame was playing Navy, and so a lot of the students went to the game in Annapolis, you know, and I had a tour of Washington, D.C., and I thought, oh, you know, this would be just a wonderful place to go to school, you know. And my mother, you know, Harvard, well, of course, that's where you're going to go. So there were not really objections, but they were always disappointed. I ended up, you know, going to Georgetown. And as I say, I always admired attorneys, you know. And I said, I think I can still say that after all these years.
Did you love what you did?
Yes. I mean, it was a real challenge, you know, and I never ran out of people. When they said, "How long have you been working?" I said, 40 years, you know, "When are you going to retire?" I said, "As soon as I catch up," because I never caught up. I mean, there's always something happening, you know. You know? Yes, I liked, and also what I enjoyed is that my role was, if a case, you know, had merit, it should be settled, you know, and most of the plaintiff's attorneys I dealt with, you know, like Rick Freed, for example, you know, I mean, we had a lot of cases together, you know. We would settle it, you know, and that would make me happy because, well, I remember one case he had where a woman, medical malpractice, and she had 2 young children, you know, and went to the deposition, and I practically had tears in my eyes, you know, when I thought about it, you know, but I was there, you know, to
help
and there were
resolve.
limitations as to authority, and anything over 200,000 had to go to the Department of Justice, and I would end up in Washington D.C. on some of those, you know, but yes, I mean, it wasn't easy, but when we achieved what was equitable and just, you know, that made me happy. Now that wasn't always true with some of the attorneys, but anyway, you know how attorneys are.
Well, when we come back, I'm going to have the same question for Gunnar Schull. You're watching Hawaii's Living Legend Lawyers, sponsored by the Hawaii State Bar Association and ThinkTech Hawaii. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
And welcome back to Hawaii's Living Legend Lawyers. I'm Craig Wagnild. I'm sitting here with Don Machado and Gunnar Schull, and the episode today is on loving your work, and it's your turn, Gunnar. I want to know, do you love your work? You're still doing it.
Yeah, I must. There's no other explanation. Actually, there's always something new in transactional work. And it's not at all, what I've been doing is not at all repetitious, and it's just interesting to come to the office and see what's waiting for me today. But you asked why I went to law school. Actually, I was at Duke, and I was an English major. And I realized around my senior year that I didn't know what I was going to do after I got out of college. And so I took the LSATs and did fairly well. And so I decided to give law school a shot. But I really had no great ambition to be a lawyer until I got to law school. And the first course that I had in law school was torts. I didn't even know what a tort was. I'm not sure I do now, but I did very well in contracts and a number of other subjects, and then I just kept it from there. And you had to make a living, so obviously when you leave law school, you try and find a law firm to work for, unless you want to hang up your own shingle, which I had no desire to do.
Sure.
And just took it from there. But I found corporate work and acquisition work and business counseling to be very enjoyable. Actually, in order to do a contract or to do an acquisition, the businessmen have to teach you their business. And if they had and as you're being taught, you're still getting paid.
Exactly.
And if,
so you get to learn and teach.
And because if you were going to, you couldn't pay these guys to give somebody an education like that, and they're paying you to get.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's certainly been an enjoyable facet of my career.
Well, you brought with you a very interesting article, and I don't want to give it away. Tell me what this is. I think we're going to put it up on the screen. We've got a picture of this. What is that?
All right, that's a bond from Oahu Sugar Company. And when I first came here, one of my jobs was to go into the archives of American factors. Oahu Sugar Company was one of the subsidiaries, not wholly owned, because it was still a public company of American factors and whatnot. And that was in the old American Factors building, which was on Fort Street and Queen Street, where the Twin Towers are now. And it was really an old-style building. And in any event, it had an attic, a cupola at the top of the building. And they stored a lot of records and everything up there. And I had to go up there, and boy, was it hot. In any event, there's no air conditioning there. I should have gotten extra pay. But anyway, I found a bunch of documents that were stored up there, and they were actually, one of the things I was supposed to do was to sort out things that they could dispose of.
Sure.
And so I found a bunch of bonds that had been issued by Oahu Sugar. And at that time, Oahu Sugar was, at the time the bonds were issued, was owned by H. Hackfeld. And that was the German company that was the predecessor to American Factors. And these bonds were payable in dollars.
And this is what you're going to because right on the bond, if you throw it back up there again,
Yeah.
you showed this to me, and it is a great testament to my powers of observation. You asked me, what do you see that's odd about this?
Yeah.
And I had no idea.
And
what was it?
Well, they're payable in Honolulu in dollars, but they're also payable in Bremen, Germany in marks. And they're also payable in gold. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. And I think this one was issued in 1914, but I have some that were issued around 1900.
Is that right?
And Hackfeld, Pfluger, Eisenberg, and Ehlers were, worked for Hackfeld at that time. They were the German contingent, and those names actually are still around in Honolulu. There's some streets named after Eisenberg, for instance, and Ehlers was the original name of Liberty House. And that name was changed because the United States expropriated the German properties in the First World War, and so what was then Hackfeld, they had about 60,000 acres of land, was sold to a group of Americans, and the Germans were bought out completely. And so to be patriotic, they changed the name of Ehlers to Liberty House, and they changed the name of H. Hackfeld and Company to American Factors, and ultimately American Factors then became AmFact, and then AmFact disappeared into a hedge fund in Chicago.
Well, Don, I want to jump back to you for a minute. Now, we've got all these young attorneys that are coming into the profession, have been, and will continue to. But right now, we've got a lot of them that are coming in looking for, to figure out how to make the law their own and how to set a career that they love. What advice can you give? And I particularly ask you ahead of time because your son is practicing law as a lawyer here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Part of our bar association. So obviously you loved it enough to encourage or at least support your son in making a decision to go into the practice of law. What would you tell someone that's looking to do that?
Having dealt with attorneys, for 50 years, and the majority, I think, were professionals. And I think I would tell the young person, remember, you are a professional. I mean, you have a responsibility, to yourself and to your clients, and to the state, to go ahead and whatever you do, will be represented in a legalistic and ethical way. And you have a duty, to always be ethical, and not take any shortcuts, etc. So,
Okay, I like that. Gunnar, what would you tell someone that's coming into the practice of law?
You mean they've already gone to law school?
They've already gone to law school. You can't talk them out of it. They're looking.
It's too late to tell them to get good grades.
Hopefully they've done that. But.
Yeah. I think, Cade Shetty at one time had a system where when new associates came in, we put them through about 4 departments, litigation, tax, corporate, and real property and whatnot, to give them an idea about what the practice is all about and whatnot, so they could make some kind of a decision. We have stopped doing that just for economic reasons, because they'd get tied up in one area and then they'd have to move to another area, and they'd be still doing work in their original assignments and whatnot. It was time consuming, and so the lawyer has to kind of decide right up front what he'd like to start with and what he'd like to try and specialize in, and I think litigation is definitely, if the lawyer is constitutionally able to take it, litigation I think is the place to start. And you can always switch over to transactional work and whatnot, but I think it's smart to figure out how the courts work, how judges work, if you can, and that'll help you out quite a bit when you have to draft contracts eventually.
Do you think the practice of law right now, what it's sort of maturated into since when you first started, smaller group of attorneys practicing, a lot more potentially interactions, such you didn't have the internet and other things that tend to create a wall. Do you think it's becoming more impersonal, more difficult to find enjoyment out of a career in law?
I don't. But the changes in that Xeroxing and the internet and whatnot have brought upon us are just amazing. I used to have time to actually read documents and think about them before somebody expected me to come up with an answer. Yeah, now they just want it instantaneous, and you can be working with somebody in Hong Kong and somebody in New York, and there's a lot of pressure. I used to like to be able to go home at night and go to sleep on a problem, and somehow when I woke up in the morning it was a little clearer, but it's hard to do that now.
You don't have much of the luxury of time.
Exactly,
Yes.
yeah.
How about you, Don?
yeah, no, I think, that in many ways, it's easier to practice law. Like, for example, one thing, when I decided that a case, should be paid, how much is it worth? And now I can go in, and get judgments, Hawaii courts, federal courts, and so on, And of course, the fact that you can get things, when I started, I didn't have a computer. In fact, I remember they brought a computer into the office, and the administrative officer came up and he said, "You haven't touched it." I said, "I don't need that darn thing, But, you couldn't do without it, Sure. No, I think that what we have, it doesn't make it easier, but it makes it more worthwhile, you know, and I think it's what we have is good. But I do think the professionalism is still in the picture. I mean,
Sure.
attorneys have to be professional, you know, and I think I've not always found that, you know, and that's kind of sad. You know.
Gunnar, do you think that's a challenge right now in our bar, and you know, here in Hawaii in particular? But you know, we've always had, you know, essentially an aloha spirit. We have a little bit different, closer community. And I've told others, you don't have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to see this person again, or I'm not going to be in front of this judge again, and such. And that almost forces a degree of civility that you might not have in, say, a larger city. But I'm not sure that that's always the case anymore.
I think Honolulu's a pretty large city now, and that's and there are a lot of lawyers. I think when I started, either I knew personally or somebody in my office would know just about every lawyer who was really actively practicing law in town, and really felt comfortable as far as the lawyers whose word was their bond. Now I think you'd be well advised to get everything in writing, and that's a big change.
That is a big change,
Yeah.
and somewhat of an unfortunate one, maybe in an old, you know, almost folksy type of old town type of viewpoint.
Yeah, it's different.
Do you see the same thing, Don?
Yes.
Yeah. So did you give your son advice about going into law school and making law as a part of his practice? Noting, of course, that he's sitting right here in our studio with you.
I'm not, he made that decision, I think, maybe based on what I was doing, you know, but he knew what I was doing, you know.
Sure.
So that wasn't, it was probably a good example for him, you know. But no, he made that decision on his own, and we've always let him do that, you know, to independently make. So.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm interested. Do you have any, you know, parting comments or thoughts about, you know, your career, about, you know, something you'd like to leave and to tell people about what, you know, the mark that you've been able to make? Gunnar, I'll start with you.
I guess the thing that strikes me the most, as far as I don't remember making any marks, but I was just looking downtown when I moved here. There was only one high-rise, and that was the old First Hawaiian Bank building, and that was about 17 stories high, and that was really the only high-rise in town. And before that, the Aloha Tower was the highest building in town. Yeah. And then I think I've had some connections with just about every building that's been built here, either financing it or actually representing the companies that built the buildings. And I remember the Castle and Cook building when it was dismantled, and then it became the Financial Plaza of the Pacific. And when it was dismantled, actually they allowed scavengers, including myself, to go into the building, and they had oak paneling everywhere, and they were pulling it apart, and if you could take it home, and actually I took a lot of it home.
You did?
Yeah, and used it. Yeah.
Don, a few comments and we'll wrap up. So what thoughts do you have on your career?
I think what I would advise, you know, like my successors, you know, is if a case is meritorious, do everything you can to settle it and avoid trial, you know, because I would go in with the U.S. attorney whenever we go to trial. But if the case is not meritorious, give everything you can, do a thorough investigation, get your witnesses and so on all lined up, you know, so we can win the case. So.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, I think it's obvious to see that these are two attorneys who love their work. And we've got a lot of other attorneys who love their work and a lot of other great shows on Hawaii's Living Legend Lawyers. This is Craig Wagnild. It's been great being a host, and it's been my honor again to be a part of this program. This is brought to you by the Hawaii State Bar Association and ThinkTech Hawaii, Hawaii's living legend lawyers. We'll be back with another program next week. Thank you very much.